haven't posted new content in a long time. What did I do on my break from the internet?
Why aren't you growing? Grow! Grow! You're not growing!
Friends, we need to talk about tomatoes. Oh boy. So, tomatoes. So I could go on about the tomato's origin in the Andes and the current threat to wild tomato biodiversity, and because we need that biodiversity, it's the only thing that's going to save modern tomatoes from everything that wants to destroy them. But then I'd have to explain centers of diversity and Nikolai Vavilov. He just wanted to end famine in Soviet Russia. My poor, beautiful Soviet son! Lysenko. Curse you, Stalin! That has nothing to do with tomatoes. I just have a lot of feelings about Soviet botanists. I could go on about the Aztecs, but then we'd have to talk about the Spanish invasion, which leads to the historic genetic inbreeding of the modern tomato with a side of genocide. I could go on about the origin of the word pomodoro. Love apples? In my garden? It's more likely than you think. You know, there's not a plant in this world that someone didn't look at and go, an aphrodisiac. Except for the English, who looked at the tomato and thought, oh no, those are too damp and cold for our English constitutions. Just give those to the Italians with their hot tummies. What, you think people are weird about food now? I could Rolodex through the myths about how tomatoes became popular in America. How does it always come back to Thomas Jefferson? Tell me if you've heard this one. So there's this one dude living in Salem, New Jersey, and then on a dare he ate a whole bushel of tomatoes on the steps of City Hall, even though everyone was like, no, don't, but you'll die. Hold my beer. I'm gonna eat this entire bushel of tomatoes if it kills me. And then he didn't die, and that's why Americans eat tomatoes. BT dubs, totally a tall tale, but I think very telling about Americans and their relationships to new vegetables. There's tomato pills, tomato wars, Alexander Livingston, I presume, tomatoes. There's the reliance of canning during the Civil War, stewed tomatoes for days. Oh, I could talk about how bumblebees and tomatoes are a match made in heaven because of their cute little bumble butt wiggle. Did I mention that they're inbred? Modern tomatoes only have like 5% of the genetic variation of their wild relatives. They're really, really inbred. This is what happens when you remove something from its natural pollinators and other cultivars. Thank God for a genetic mutation that made tomatoes self-fertilizing, otherwise we never would have had pasta con salsa. Yes, it's called sauce, not gravy. What is wrong with you, Jersey? This is a call-out post. But then I'd be here forever. So let's save that stuff for another episode. You are President Chester A. Arthur, and you might not be aware of this, but you're a man that no one's going to care about in the year 2018. But you've got a bigger problem. See, there was this little thing that happened in America. You might have heard about it. It was called the Civil War. Kind of a big deal for us. Kind of still a big deal for some of us. Now, to pay for that war, the federal government had, on top of taking out huge loans, placed high tariffs on imports. Nella, what's a tariff? What a timely question for America. Now, according to the dictionary, I'm citing the dictionary for thematically appropriate reasons you will soon understand. A tariff is a tax or duty to be paid on a particular class of imports or exports. It's a tax paid directly by the U.S. importer for a foreign good. And it is a tool beloved by isolationists. You get Americans to pay more for foreign goods so that they naturally prefer cheaper local goods. And the federal government gets money from the imported goods, instead of, say, implementing an income tax. Let me tell you about this little thing called a whiskey rebellion one day. Now, at this time, about 50 to 60% of the federal budget came from high tariffs because there's always going to be people in industries that need foreign goods. They're going to pay the tariff. And that meant a lot of money was coming into the federal government. Now, I am not an economist, but I am told that in the grand scheme of governmenting, A big surplus is a no-no. You create the federal budget, you throw in all the costs you think you're going to have, and then anything left over you've got to either throw in a vault or throw in a bank. They couldn't even use it to pay off the wartime loans, because that would mean paying premium prices to rush the process, and that would have been putting even more money into the pockets of the hella rich, because capitalism is a hell of a drug. You thought this was a video about tomatoes. Surprise! Economics. It's a political nightmare. You have a country growing like gangbusters, but credit is tight, wages are low, and growth is hurting because the government can't just put the money back into circulation because there's more of it than our gold standard can cover. Economically, it makes no sense to keep the high tariffs because you're just locking away millions of dollars into a vault where it's doing nothing. But in this crazy pants period, it's political suicide to cut taxes. Industrialists believed that high tariffs protected their ability to sell their goods for high prices, and those people vote. But if you don't do something about the high tariffs, then farmers, small businesses, and railroads, well, they're all going to get mad at you because the high tariffs hurt their ability to buy foreign goods, and they also vote. Oh, spoilers. The surplus issue wouldn't get resolved until the 1890s, when the government finally came up with a good use for all that money, mainly by fixing rivers, roads, and providing pensions for Union veterans. Well, would you look at that? Government investment in national infrastructure and veterans fixing a problem. So in 1882, President Arthur puts together a commission to figure out what tariffs can be reduced. And of course, the commission insists deep reductions all around. But then it gets to Congress. It's always Congress. Say hello to the Tariff Act of 1883, also known as the Mongrel Tariff Act. It's a mess. I mean, it did reduce some tariffs by only 1.5%. Thanks, guys. Now, President Arthur, not impressed, he ends up working out some reciprocal trade agreements with other nations for the raw materials the U.S. actually needs for, industry. And so we come to the meat of our little chat today, tomatoes. The fruit that legally became a vegetable, because under the Mongrel Tariff Act, imported vegetables were taxed, but fruits were not. The year is 1886, and you are John Nix, and your family has been in the fruit and veg business since 1839. Now, you've got the shipment of tomatoes coming in hot from the West Indies, but this collector of the Port of New York dude named Edward L. Hedden, he's telling you gotta pay duties on these tomatoes. You have to pay tariffs on the tomatoes because of Schedule G. The provisions of the 1883 Tariff Act states that vegetables in their natural state or in salt or brine not specifically enumerated or provided for in this act 10% ad valorem. Tomatoes have to be tariffed. They're vegetables. But tomatoes are botanically a fruit. And according to that same act, a fruit, green, ripe, or dried, not specifically enumerated or provided for in this act, fall under the list of freebies in the clause, sir. Horse crap. Just pay the tariff. I'll pay. But under protest, and I'll be seeing you in court. So this goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Now I know what you're thinking. What? And you're probably thinking after that, okay, but how did they resolve it? Well, they pulled out 3 different dictionaries, and the defendant and the plaintiff had a dictionary off. I'm dead serious about this. The plaintiff's counsel read in evidence definitions of the word fruit and vegetables from Webster's Dictionary, Worcester's Dictionary, and the Imperial Dictionary. They then called in 2 witnesses who had been in the business of selling fruit and vegetables for 30 years and asked them, hey, fruits and vegetables, So do fruits and vegetables mean something different when it comes to trade or commerce from what I just read out loud from these 3 different dictionaries? And the witnesses were like, no, that's what fruits and vegetables mean. Pretty sure it meant that back in 1883 when the Tariff Act got passed. It's just thrilling stuff. Absolutely scintillating. So then the plaintiff's counsel read in evidence from the same dictionaries the definition of the word tomato. Now, I was able to find the 1877 Webster's Dictionary, and in it, tomatoes are described as thus: a plant and its fruit, the Lycopersicum, or Solanum esculentum. The fruit, which is also called love apple, is usually of a rounded, flattened form, but often irregular in shape. It is of a bright red or yellow color, and is eaten either raw or cooked. Ha! Fruits in your court, Mr. Hedden. So then, the defendant's counsel reads into evidence the definition of the words pea, eggplant, cucumber, squash, and pepper from Webster's Dictionary. The plaintiff counters by reading in evidence the definitions of potato, turnip, parsnip, cauliflower, cabbage, carrot, and bean from Webster's and Worcester's dictionaries. And that was it. That was the evidence. I mean, all they had to do was go to the 1772 French seed catalog wherein tomatoes are listed as a vegetable and not an ornamental for the first time. God, Karen, get your act together. Well, spoilers, Hedden won. Tomatoes were judged to be vegetables and not fruits. Justice Gray gave the following opinion on Nix versus Hedden. Botanically speaking, tomatoes are the fruit of the vine, just as are cucumbers, squashes, beans, and peas. But, in the common language of the people, whether sellers or consumers of provisions, all these are vegetables which are grown in kitchen gardens, and which, whether eaten cooked or raw, are, like potatoes, carrots, parsnips, turnips, beets, cauliflower, cabbage, celery, and lettuce, usually served at dinner, in, with, or after the soup, fish, or meats, which constitute the principal part of the repast, and not, like fruits generally, as dessert. Of course, this is ignoring the culinary history of using tomatoes in sweet marmalade, sweet jams, and sweet tarts, record of which you can find as early as 1824 in Mary Randolph's cookbook, The Virginia Housewife. But, then you'd probably have to ask a woman how she uses tomatoes, and who would do a thing like that? Okay, so the Jefferson story about tomatoes. So the story goes that he was walking around Lynchburg, Virginia, and he came across his neighbor's front yard, and he was like, oh, what a strange fruit on that vine. And she was like, thanks, don't eat it, it'll kill you. And he goes, YOLO, and he eats it anyway. And that's how Thomas Jefferson introduced the tomato to America, which I call bullshit. A huge thank you to my countrymen. Amy Thorne, Allen, BN12, Bob Chipman, Christina Tillman, Claire Belshaw, Donald Kronos King, Gallon Russell, Gowell, Gomer, Hillary Thomas, Jill V. Friedman, Kirky Ressa, Matthew Abbott, Pfeiffer, Sarah A. Lancaster, The Nerdcore Cabaret, and T-Boot Nicodeme. A huge thank you to my ear lenders, Chandra, William Christopher, and Xanath Pink. I couldn't do this without you. Thank you for your Patreon support. If you like my content here, I also do a podcast called The Apocalypse Book Club with my friend Raven. We're reading all apocalyptic fiction in chronological order, starting in 1805. You can follow us on Twitter at ApocalypseC, and you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. Are like potatoes, carrots, parsnips, turnips, beets, cauliflower. I always talk about cauliflower. I literally can't see what's on the screen because I'm not wearing my glasses and I don't wear contacts.